Pratham, in less than. Okay. So we should start, Pratham.
Yeah, sure. I will start. A very warm good evening to everyone who has joined us today. On behalf of the entire Dark team, I am excited and elated to welcome everyone to the third session of the Dark TheDaak. The Dark is a book review journal which publishes original book reviews across disciplines and genres. An initiative of the Dark, TheDaak is a humble attempt to build a space for young scholars and students to critically engage with ideas and experiences. In the previous two TheDaaks, we hosted scholars whose work has dealt with such questions and issues as cinema, representation, marginality, politics of space, etc. The session today is titled Researching the Social in Religion, Methods, Ethics, and Situated Knowledge. As speaker for the session, we have with us Dr. Daisy Barman. Dr. Barman teaches sociology at Gandhi Institute of Technology and Management, Bangalore. She holds a PhD in sociology from Center for Study of Social Systems, JNU, New Delhi. Her research area constitutes sociology of religion, caste, exclusion, subalternity, and social stratification. She also currently serves as the co-convener of RC6 Sociology of Religion, Indian Sociological Society. As discussant for today's session, we have with us Dr. Sanjukta Nath. Dr. Nath is an assistant professor in the School of Liberal Arts, Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University. She specializes in gender, international politics, international law, sexual and gender-based violence and conflict zones, and masculinities. She also holds a doctorate degree from the Center for International Politics, Organizations and Disarmament, JNU, New Delhi. Dr. Nath is also an editor at TheDaak. She envisions and directs interdisciplinary academic conversations. On behalf of the entire team, we extend a very warm welcome, a token of gratitude to both the speaker and the discussant. With this being said, may I now request Dr. Burman to kindly start with her talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pratham. And good afternoon to everyone. I would like to begin by thanking the Dark Baithak for inviting me to share this space. And thank you all for being here. I thank Sanjukta for being the discussant. And above all, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Jigyasa for reaching out to me to deliver this talk. But let me start with a disclaimer here. The questions that I'm going to explore today in this talk are not the ones that I have already answered. So they have emerged in the aftermath of my PhD, and what I can only maybe term as the love-hate relationship that I have with my thesis. So I'm sure many of us, whoever have finished our PhDs recently, when we revisit our doctoral journey retrospectively, new questions emerge, right? And we become the toughest critique of our own work. So at times we are quite impressed by what we have written, but most of the time, especially in my case, I want to tear the pages off and throw them against a wall. So I have designed my talk today in a way that I speak more on the conceptual and the methodological challenges backed by my ethnographic anecdotes, so that I don't lose all my time in the detailed description of my field, uh, as some parts might feel out of context for many of you who are not familiar with my field site, but we can always circle back to the details during the question answer sessions if you're interested. So again, I'm Dr. Daisy Burman. I teach sociology at Geetham University, Bangalore. I've done my PhD in Center for the Study of from Center for the Study of Social Systems, JNU, under the supervision of Professor Surinder Singh Jotka, who among all has pushed me to revisit my doctoral journey all too often, and also has given me greatest of the advices right after I submitted my PhD that let it marinate for a few months, Daisy. Don't go back to it now. So anyway, cut to 2.5, 3 years later. I thank Jigyasa for offering me the platform to think out loud with all of you, the challenges and possibilities of doing sociology of religion by reflecting on the experiences I gathered from the field. So my doctoral work, very briefly, is on the Vaishnava religious order in Assam, which is more than 500 years old, which emerged out of the Bhakti movement, in the later part of the Bhakti movement. I studied the religious life, the authority structure, and the social hierarchies of the Vaishnava religious space in Assam, interrogating two suborders within it, or two folds within it. There are four suborders of Vaishnavas within the Vaishnava fold, Vaishnava religious order in Assam. So I studied two of the suborders. One suborder is composed of the upper caste, which has taken a Brahminical uh, course to consider how they practice and how they preach Vaishnavism in Assam. And the other suborder that I studied is the suborder of the marginalized, the lower caste, the tribal communities who have been historically excluded from the hegemonic Vaishnava fold in Assam. So essentially, I look at how caste and faith intersect in a religious order which was born out of egalitarian philosophies of bhakti, which ironically uh, and I look at the terrains of marginalization, the practice of untouchability, conceptualization of untouchability, how untouchability and the other is conceptualized within the Vaishnava narrative, and what are the strategies of resistance that the marginalized communities, the subaltern Vaishnavas, exhibit or they operate to operate within the Brahminically dominant Vaishnava religious uh, religious order. Or I'm refraining from using the term sect because that's a separate topic altogether. But maybe if we can have another discussion some other day, we can talk about how we should rethink the categories like sect that we have imbibed from the Western terminologies. But okay. So anyway, uh, in sum, my doctoral work engages with the intersection of religious authority and caste, religious authority, caste within the Vaishnava religious fold in Assam, and how caste has a very specific configurations. And this is it's not a universalized idea of how caste operates within Vaishnavism, but how the localized understanding of caste and untouchability gets reflected in the relationships, the social relationships that emerge in in the light of religiosity, in the light of faith. So to begin with the topic of our discussion today, which is researching the social in religion, methods, ethics, and situated knowledge. So at its core, this talk is, at least I wanted to project this talk as epistemological and methodological intervention, or a, uh, a talk that would at least highlight the challenges that we face when we set out to study religion sociologically, especially in contexts where religion is not merely a domain of beliefs and ritual. So, but deeply intertwined with the lived realities of our social identities and the relationship with the existing power dynamics. So it captures three interlinked concerns, as you have read in my abstract. That first, there is a conceptual question, which is what do we mean when we use terms like social, religious, socio-religious, terms that we often use and don't give much thought about. The second is a methodological one, that how do our research methods shape what we come to know as religion? And finally, the last question that I would like to engage with here in this talk is an ethical one. That what are our responsibilities when we enter into the worlds of our respondents, where the social and the sacred are not two separate realms, they are merged together. So where faith cannot be separated from structures of inequality, or where faith itself may be a site of subjection as well as struggle or resistance. So in sociology, what do we mean by social, uh, and what are we studying when we say we are studying religion? And when we use these hybrid terms like socio-religious, are we merely adding two domains together, or are we pointing to something more complex, something that cannot be captured within the disciplinary silos. So, and I believe that these questions, which obviously appeared to me much later after I finished my PhD, have methodological consequences. So something that I've been thinking, trying to work around post my PhD journey. So, in classical sociology, if you take how social was mostly seen as something structured, something which is external, like institutions, roles, or norms that shape people's behavior, religion, in that sense, was a tool for holding society together. One of the founding scholars of sociology, Emile Durkheim, would call religion is society worshipping itself. So, but over time, this understanding has shifted, and scholars have started to argue that the social is not just something out there. It's something we live, experience, and negotiate on a day-to-day basis. So it shows up in our habits, in our gestures, in our silences, and the ways we relate to each other. So the social is not a fixed identity, but a set of repeated, regulated acts. So Bourdieu's concept of habitus has been the most useful for me it to define social. The habitus, as many of us know, is this embodied set of dispositions we carry, how we think, how we move, and how we act, how they are shaped by our social background and our everyday experiences, right? In the simplest of the terms, of course, it's more complex than that, but if you have to put it simply. So this shift mattered in my field, where the social often meant hierarchy, especially in terms of caste. And so when a quote unquote Shudra Vaishnava's ritual is seen as folk or cultic, and a Brahminical ritual is seen as authentic and classical in Assam, in the hegemonic discourse of Assam, a discourse of religion or Vaishnavism in Assam. We are not just looking at religious differences, we are seeing how power shapes what we count as legitimate religion. So, reconsidering the social is vital for sociology of religion, I believe, because it challenges us to broaden our analytical lens. It prevents us from reducing religion to an institution or to an ideology. It invites us to think of religion as a relational practice, something that is done, something that is felt, something that is negotiated and also resisted. So, what I gathered in my field is that if you wish to study religion sociologically, we must treat the social not as a static, stable backdrop, but as a dynamic process, an arena of negotiation, difference, and dissent. So, caste, ethnicity, kinship, gender roles, affective hierarchies, and the spatial arrangements all constitute the religious field. They are not add-ons to religion. They are constitutive of it. So moving on, if we now, when we use the term religious and how sociology has approached the religious has also shifted over time. So sociology also has carefully maintained a distinction, its distinction from theology. And there's a very interesting article by Henri Bethe. If there are students of sociology just starting out to, the article's name is Religion as a Subject of Sociology, where he discusses or he engages with the complexities of studying religion, where he distinguishes between sociological study of religion and a theological study of religion. So, so sociologists have long been asking what makes something religious, and we obviously, if, students of sociology would agree that we always begin with Emile Durkheim, who argued that religion is not defined by a belief in a god per se, but by how societies mark certain things as sacred, right? So sacred, set apart, protected, and worshipped. So religion, in this view, is about the collective rituals that bind people together through shared meanings. The sacred is then less about the divine and more about what a community holds as divine or deep, or what the community deeply values. And then in classical sociology, we also look at, there is also work from on religion done by classical sociologists like Max Weber, who would see religion as a source of meaning. Right? He would focus on how people act in the world based on their deeply held beliefs. And for Weber, religion helps people make sense of the world, and even in an increasingly disenchanted rational world. But these classical ideas, shaped by European experiences, don't fully account for how religion is lived elsewhere, especially in South Asia, where belief and ritual, the personal and the social, the sacred and the everyday are deeply intertwined. So, and we have, we are aware of scholars like Talalasa and others who have, in fact, questioned the category of religion itself as how it is deeply colored by secular liberal state or the colonial governance. So, but we can go on and on here, but moving on. Yes, so this is where there's a sociologist, Donald Swenson's, he provides a three-dimensional model of the sacred, which becomes very helpful, especially for when I try to look for answers of these certain questions. So he invites us to look at sacred in three interrelated dimensions. And they're very interesting. So first dimension is the sacred within, the interior world of personal devotion. You know, the spiritual longing, the moral striving. This is where religion is felt as an inner experience. The second dimension is the sacred between, the shared rituals, gestures, the social ties that emerge between people. So religion here is relational, practiced within the community. And the third dimension is the sacred among. This refers to the institutional and the cultural forms that give religion shape, such as myths, doctrines, sacred spaces, physical spaces, moral orders. So the sacred within, sacred between, and the sacred among, it's seemed to me as like a comprehensive model if we are trying to study or attempting to study religion sociologically. So what makes Swenson's framework compelling is that it does not reduce religion to belief or to an institution. It allows us to see how religion can be felt, performed, and structured all at once. So it's a model that travels across religious traditions and helps us understand religion not as a fixed object, but as a layered, lived, negotiated, and situated practice. So in my fieldwork, I understood that what counts as religious is not what what it's not always what people say. It's how they act, who is allowed to participate, and how sacredness is distributed across bodies, spaces, and voices. I'll give you an anecdote, not an anecdote, an instance from my field where I discovered that there is a difference between membership and participation. As you know, that these sectarian, now I'm like quoting and quoting it, the sectarian formations require membership, formal membership, and the so the Brahminical suborders or of Vaishnavism in Assam has been criticized, at least now in the contemporary time, for not being inclusive, for their historical exclusion and practices of untouchability towards certain communities, especially the tribal communities that live in the Vaishnava hub of Assam. And when now you talk about membership to the heads or to the older monks of these religious institutions, which we call the hotros, they would tell us that yes, we give membership to the previously excluded communities. But if you dig deeper, you would realize that it's not only about the membership, how the membership is given. What does that what does that membership embody? What does it imply? So does membership mean participation? So does your membership guarantee participation? So if you are from a particular social background, are you allowed to perform a certain kind of ritual? Forget about performing certain kind of ritual. Where are you initiated? So memberships are given by initiation, which generally happens within the premises of hotros, which are you can call them monasteries, but they're not always monasteries. But yes, like the closest English word that I can point out here is monastery. So initiation generally happen in a very personal uh, interaction, in a personal setup in Brahminical hotras and between the guru and the neophyte. But what I found in the field was that this whole initiation ritual was redefined and reformulated to initiate members from communities which are in the lower ranks of the caste hierarchy or outside of the caste hierarchy. So how you redefine certain rituals, certain sacred and redefine sacred spaces so that you keep the sacred away from certain bodies, away from certain communities, so away from certain quote unquote untouchable bodies, but you would also want to imbibe the contemporary secular secular mm, you would say kind of nature or characteristic which would which is offering the membership, but not that would be deeply dyed with your prejudices and with your historical the historical practice of the practice of untouchability that has historically existed in the community, in the Vaishnava community in Assam. So uh, these are this is where I think in instances like this, the three-dimensional model of offered by Donald Swenson becomes very useful, which the classical sociologists may not be able to help me understand. So moving on, this there is another. I would also like to mention another anthropologist, and his way of approaching religion is very interesting, which is he studies the affects that is associated in the religious space. And the anthropologist's name is Frank Heidemann, and he has a very interesting essay called Social Aesthetics, atmosphere, and proprioception. And he invites us to think about how the sacred is experienced from an affective point of view. So Heidemann shows that religion is not only about belief or doctrine, it is shaped through rhythm, through postures, through gestures, and the sensory atmosphere of a space. So the physical arrangement of bodies, the repetition of sound, the clapping of hands, during kirtan, or the weight of silence, all of these create what he calls the affective atmosphere, which I argue can be a very important subject matter for sociology, for scholars working on sociology of religion. So during my fieldwork, something which I observed and felt, but I failed to conceptualize, was this aspect. That I observed that the sacred is not always spoken. It is also experienced through quiet gestures, through how people appear, in their attire, how they move, how they wait or position themselves in relation to others. So Heidemann's framework later has helped me to take this seriously, this subtle embodied dimensions of religious life, not as a background details, but as central to how religion is lived and how power, access, and recognition are distributed in a religious field. So what happens when we bring these two together, the social and the religious, when we say something is socio-religious? I think it points to a dense, entangled field where religion and society are not two separate domains, but that happen to interact, but are mutually constitutive dimensions of how religion is lived or how society is structured. So the term socio-religious allows us to move beyond the secular religious binary that secularization theorists have taken for granted. So, it recognizes that in many contexts, religious practice is not confined to the private sphere at all. And it shapes and is shaped by our social identities like caste, ethnicity, gender, race, and the power relations inherent in all of them. So here, there is a scheme of modalities that was offered that is offered by the authors who wrote this book, Sociology of the Sacred, or I might have gotten the book's name wrong, but I've promised together that I'll circulate a list of bibliography. So the scholars' names are Meller and Schilling. They offer a scheme of four modalities to study the sacred in sociology. So among the four, there is one interesting modality which they call the socio-religious modality, which I find helpful in answering my questions. So they argue that religion is not just an abstract system of beliefs and or doctrines. It is lived, embodied, and embedded in the moral and the spatial fabric of the everyday. So in this modality, the sacred is enacted through rituals, bodily disciplines, or normative conduct, or and community life. So it has the power to stabilize the social order, but they also argue that the sacred is not innocent because the sacred also has the potential to discipline as well as to perpetuate inequality and exclusion, especially when the sacred is intertwined with caste, gender, or the idea of purity and pollution, as it's prevalent in the Indian, especially in the South Asian context. So if we take seriously that the social religious is not a fusion of two separate domains, but a field of ongoing negotiations, then our methods must also shift. We cannot study religion simply through the scriptures, the doctrines, the teachings, or the institutional forms. Nor can we treat the social as a neutral backdrop. We need to attend to the everyday embodied affective and the spatial dimensions of religious life, the ways in which the sacred is reproduced, contested, and lived on the ground. So we must also critically be reflexive about the categories we bring into the field, whether they belong to any strand of any theoretical leaning that we have, or theoretical framework that we use. We need to be very, very reflexive about what categories that we bring to the field when we study the world of our respondents. Moving on to the methodological question and making how knowledge is produced in the field, and I think it's a very significant question, and I'm sure I don't have the answer to it, but how I view it is that when we study religion sociologically, if religion is that, first of all, we assume, and we have to assume, and we have to establish that religion is not a fixed object, right? But it's a relational, it's relational, it's situated, and it's an affective practice. So if religion is experienced through our different social identities and not just through belief, then method is no longer just tool. So it becomes a question of how we position ourselves in our field, both in how we know and in how we relate to the people and the worlds that we study. So one of the most important shifts in sociology of religion today is this growing recognition that method is never neutral. It is shaped not only by theory or the intellectual framework that we use to make sense of the world, but also but also by its history, the legacies of how religion has been studied and governed in different times and contexts, especially within the disciplinary boundaries. Right? It is shaped also, and most importantly, I think, by our institutional location, like where we are situated as researchers, whether we are in Western academia, or we are in Indian public universities, or we are studying it from our activist circles, right? So it is shaped by the political economy of knowledge production, which I think all of us would unanimously agree in considering the contemporary scenario in academia, that it's the largest systems that determine what kinds of research are valued, funded, published, and circulated. So the idea of the detached, impartial observer, a model foundational to positivist sociology, has been systematically challenged by subsequent schools of thought, feminist school of thought, subaltern studies, or post-colonial scholars who remind us that the field is always structured by power. So this critique is borne out in the politics of access, voice, and silence, in who gets studied, who gets cited, and who gets to speak. To do ethnography in such a field is to enter a space already saturated with hierarchy. And I mean, scholars like Regge, Thapan have talked about how the epistemological, for example, when Sharmila Regge talks about the standpoint of epistemology, uh, the fundamental question is we must not simply aim to give voices to the margin, right? We must also learn from the margin as a critical location, a standpoint from which the dominant logics of caste, gender, and religion can be reinterrogated. And Meenakshi Raban also has a very interesting article on this in Learning to Learn from Below, talks around the same the politics of knowledge production within academic discourse or within academic circles. So this insight was especially crucial in making sense of my field, where caste often structures who participates in ritual, who enters which space, and who is even legible to the ethnographer. So ethnography then cannot be limited to immersion, right, and to rapport building. It is about recognizing how one's presence affects the field, who answers, who remains silent, who assumes authority in your presence as a researcher, and who hesitates to speak, even when the ritual language is their own language. So this power dynamics, we have to recognize this power dynamics while studying ethnography, and ethnography should, with the how we view ethnography as thick description, should move beyond just as a thick description, but also a site where we ask these uncomfortable questions about power of the researcher and the tension of power between the respondents and the researcher. So for instance, I often notice that in my field, the older respondents from a higher or upper caste positions would assume themselves as the spokespersons of the religious tradition, even when I'm having a focus group discussion, right? Who speaks in the focus group discussion is also a very crucial question to ask. So, and sometimes I was in fact, you know, suggested what kind of questions to ask. So, and I'll get back to it later in another instance. So, uh, I mean, especially when they position themselves as the spokesperson of a particular religious tradition, uh, it speaks volumes about the power relation within the religious field, within the members, within the so-called equal members of the same religious fold, right? So the questions I asked about doctrine, about religious authority or sacred space were often shaped by the social realities of caste and gender. that I found in the field, I realized in the field, I might not have conceptualized well in my thesis, but sometimes they came back to me in unexpected or in indirect ways, filtered through silence, hesitation, or coded responses. So in such a mode, ethnography doesn't remain a method per se. It's a form of an ethical engagement, one that demands reflexivity, vulnerability, and above all, mm, an attentiveness to what our tools can or cannot reveal. So then we must ask ourselves that what does our method authorize? What does it allow us to see? What remains outside the frame? Or who are we centering and who are we inadvertently silencing? So this calls for more than just I think methodological reflexivity. It calls for some kind of epistemic humility, if I may say, an acknowledgement that our categories, no matter how theoretically sound, are situated and limited. As scholars working on religion, I think we need to remain open to non-canonical ways of knowledge, of oral fragments of gestures and atmospheres and silences, as well as refusals uh, from our respondents. So method, therefore, is not a neutral container. It is a site of struggle and a space where dominant and subaltern knowledges collide, contend, and sometimes speak past each other. So what we call data is never innocent. I mean, even bringing Meller and Schilling. It is shaped by where we stand, whom we hear, and what we are able to or willing to understand. So moving to the ethical question, so it's a more difficult question, that what are the ethical stakes of our research practice, right? In sociology of religion, ethics cannot be, I think, reduced to this procedural protocols or procedures or institutional protocols like the standard check boxes that we have of informed consent, anonymity, or non-interference. These are necessary, yes, they're very necessary, but are not sufficient. So we need to ask instead that what does it mean to produce knowledge in contexts already shaped by histories of inequality? Right? And how do we, as researchers, remain accountable when we enter the social and the sacred worlds of our respondents, marked by deep asymmetries of power, where worlds where faith is not just spiritual, but also social, embodied, and hierarchical. Right? So I mean, I think just feminist scholars also, I mean, beyond the feminist scholars, Gopal Guru and Sundar Surukai becomes very, significant when we ask this kind of questions, where they talk about how marginality is not simply a demographic or empirical fact that sociologists sometimes, tend to consider marginality as something quantifiable or something which can be studied as only as an empirical fact. And I'm not saying this is a wrong approach, but I think there is more to it. Marginality is led. So when we position and when we study in such a position, when we study especially religion in South Asia, we must contend with a terrain already overcoded by hegemonic representations. So how do we understand marginality beyond treating it as an empirical fact? Maybe then the sociology of affect or the affective dimension of studying sociology of religion might help us here, right? So it also becomes important to recognize that in subaltern communities, especially that the communities that are the community that I have studied, religiosity is not just a personal belief. It is also about struggle for recognition, for voice, for dignity. Faith and devotion are deeply tied in their context with experiences of exclusion and resistance and humiliation. So religious practices like songs, prayers, the gatherings are not were not only the devotional practices, that how they articulated it. They're often there were everyday ways of asserting their presence in spaces where these people of the certain communities are otherwise made invisible. So during one of my conversations, I've encountered a set of questions. Uh, I have encountered similar set of questions a number of times, which I mentioned a while ago, that there were certain questions that startled me at least in the beginning of my fieldwork, that came from my respondents, that what do you want to write about us? Why do you want to write about us? What are we going to get back? And who are going to read about us? In fact, some older monks, as I've told you, that have offered me suggestions on what kind of questions would be helpful for my research, and how should I frame certain questions, how should I not frame certain questions with a sense of authority. And it's also the politics of age, politics of gender also comes in between. That's a separate story altogether, maybe for some other day. But and I come to realize that those are not questions pertaining to their representation alone in my work. It was about power, about illegibility, about an afterlife of my fieldwork. It was a refusal to be merely a source or a gesture that demanded reciprocity, clarity, and ethical responsibility. So, in moments like this, that remind us that ethics is not procedural, it is relational, it is historical, it is political. It is about the terms of recognition, the possibilities of refusal, and the difficult work of being answerable not only to our academic peers, but to the people and the community who make our research possible. So we must ask, who do we speak for? Who do we cite and why? And what silences do we preserve? And which do we interrupt? So moving on to the concluding section of my talk, I think I've taken more than the time that was allotted to me. I think I'm allowed to do so, Jigyasa.
Yes, please go. Please go ahead.
And just 10 more minutes. So I believe that uh, coming to the point of situated knowledge that you can see in the title of my talk, that how do I use the concept of situated knowledge while trying to answer these questions, or not, if not to answer these questions, but while framing these questions, is that I believe that sociologists of religion have a lot to learn from feminist theorists. The question, for example, the question that where we speak from, a question that is more both epistemological as well as ethical question. So this brings me to this concept of situated knowledge that I have used in my title as one of the central themes of my talk. And in her 1988 essay, Donna Haraway brings in this concept and challenges the idea that knowledge can come from a neutral, all-seeing position. She calls this the God trick. I think all of us know that the uh, beautiful concept that says that the God trick is an illusion that knowledge can be produced from a neutral, disembodied, all-seeing vantage point. So Haraway argues that this kind of objectivity, the view from nowhere objectivity, is not just misleading, it's also very harmful. It hides the fact that all knowledge comes from somewhere, from specific positions shaped by power, historical specificities, and embodied experience. So Haraway, when she argues that knowledge is, it's this kind of knowledge, situated knowledge, she argues that it's not only, it doesn't make it invalid. Knowledge has to be situated. Knowledge cannot be an something that is produced by a god trick. So it's only through acknowledging one's location, the social, political, and affective, that more responsible and honest knowledge becomes possible. This insight is very important, I think profoundly important for scholars of sociology of religion, where our research encounters, where are always shaped by deeply hierarchical social identities in the field, especially in the field, and where we are never just researchers. We are embodied presences, always perceived, interpreted, or challenged by the very people whom we study. So it's a transactional relationship. It's not in a sense that I give you like how one of, I think, Gooden had would call responses that we gather in the field as gifts. I don't agree with the whole phrase at all. That it's not gifts. It's kind of a transaction which is deeply dyed with a very subtle way of how power works. So in my field, it became very, very clear that as someone marked by certain ethnicity, certain gender, age, language, education, and then I can go in detail about it if you have a question regarding this, that I found that certain devotional practices were demonstrated with ease and openness to me, particularly those that fit within the bhakti, recognizable bhakti framework, but some remain partially hidden. So shared only in fragments, or gestures. So it was told by the keepers of religious authority in my field way too often what would not be important for my work or what would be important for my research. So what I encountered in these moments wasn't a lack of knowledge, but a kind of knowing that can't be easily written down. So many of these practices, like spoken, embodied, gestured, don't fit neatly into what is officially recorded and recognized as religion per se. So they're too emotional, too personal, too complex for categories like text or doctrine. And yet they are at the heart of how religion is actually lived. And I'm trying to find a way to write about it and hopefully sociologically in the future. So anyway, moving on. So this is why Haraway's insistence on situatedness is methodological and ethical. So it reminds us that our access to religious life is always mediated by our relationship, our language, and our social legibility. So therefore, I argue that rather than aiming at capturing or explaining the religious world, we might ask instead, what makes something visible in this context, and to whom is it visible? What does the community choose to share, and what does it choose to hold back? Can silence, hesitation, or contradiction also be framed as knowledge? So, to practice a critical sociology of religion, we must, I believe, begin with the recognition that our knowledge is always partial, situated, and relational. Our task is not to eliminate this partiality, but to remain accountable to or to reflect on what we see, how we see, and how are we seen, and what forms of power and intimacy shape our interactions in the field. So to conclude, researching the social in the religion is not about locating a pre-given object of belief, ritual, or doctrine that at least I have established after revisiting my doctoral journey. Uh, and but it is about staying with this messy, entangled, often contradictory ways in which religion is lived, especially in the context marked by
It seems there is some problem at Dr. Barman's end. Yeah,
Yes, there was a power cut here. Okay, I don't know, where did you lose me, but now where was I when you lost me? Can you hear me now? I connected
Yes,
my system with
you
my
were.
phone network. So, Jigyasa, can you tell me, where did you lose me? I mean, while concluding?
I think the last I heard you was about silences, and then shortly after that, I couldn't hear you at all.
Oh, okay. So yes, I think you can hear me now. I've
Yeah.
connected with my mobile network. So I think I was just in the concluding section of my talk, that to practice a critical sociology of religion, we must begin with the recognition that our knowledge is always partial, it's always situated, and it's always relational. So our task is not to eliminate this partiality, but to remain accountable to it, and to reflect on what we see, how we are seen, and all other forms of power and intimacy that shape our relationships in the field with our respondents. So the researching the social and religion is not about locating a pre-given object or a category of belief, a ritual or a doctrine. This is where sociology perhaps is moves away from theology. So it is about staying with this messy and tangled, contradictory ways in which religion is lived, especially in the context marked by caste exclusion, or histories of revolt, histories of resistance, histories of untouchability and humiliation and exclusion, atrocities, and Assam's Vaishnava religious. The history of Assam's Vaishnavism is marked by bloody histories of revolt, of resistance, of antagonism, of indifference. And I would love to take it up if you want to, if anyone has any question regarding this. So to conclude, what we require, what I think as sociologists of religion, what we require is to re-examine our categories, our theoretical frameworks that we bring along with us when we go to the field, and to reflect on our methods, and to reorient our ethics from procedural to political. So let us understand method not as a toolkit, but as a stance, how to see knowledge not as a product, but as a relation, and to write not from the place of authority, but from the place of ongoing accountability. So with this, I conclude my talk. Uh, Thank you so much for patiently listening to me.
No, thank you so much, Daisy, Dr. Bowman. It was amazing. I think I wanted to make detailed notes, and I probably already have made detailed notes, to be very fair to you. And
You.
I would now swiftly move to Dr. Sanjukta Nath, who is the discussant today. And Sanjukta agreed to reflect on some of the things that you've said today, and then we'll open the floor for question answers. We have a number of participants here, but we'll move to Sanjukta first, and to Dr. Nath. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Daisy. It was a great, I think, the critical reflection that we had right now, and how that whole concept of method and looking at method, not something that we also as a researcher, somewhere we come from a position of already making something. There's nothing objectivity, right? So the whole criticality of method. So, and how the whole discourse of ethnography, be it in any field, once we decide that we need to do an ethnographic research, we already have some sort of idea as to what ideas we're going to go and get, and then it's already very much layered. I like how you have given us the whole reflectivity that it made me also as a researcher to go back and think, yes, this is something that I was doing, and these reflections are very much required. I think I personally would like this discussion to just, as everybody from here would not too much be aware of the different sects or shotras that we talk about in Vaishnavism, right? And I think you began with one, the dominant one, Brahmanical, and then the resistance shatra. So if you could also, I think if it can, it will be very kind of you to like little bit highlight on how the gestures or the effective nature of those two may define or redefine Vaishnavism in right in the certain parts. Second, I went to your works also, and I saw you talking about how you being woman also in the field make a little it makes how what kind of focus groups and how come what kind of response are you gonna get. That also is some the hidden patriarchal mindset also is there, right? So the challenges for ethnography or as a researcher is quite much. So if we could also highlight that as a student or anybody who would like to research on this, what could be those problems that in the field that could have been. Third, I think if we could, the methodological part that you talk about and how I believe that methodological part and the layering of anything that we're looking into, be it religion, be it any kind of social issue, if I want to as a researcher doing it cannot be just related to like we cannot limit it to religion, social, caste. If we could also highlight how the whole caste and tribe issues in the whole region, if we could talk about, like since I am also from Assam, so I can the whole idea of tribe, it is quite distinct, the issues that if you can talk about the caste and tribe dimension in the whole discourse of religion, right? Caste practices and then the tribe practices of certain micro-religious practices, some certain sacred practices that are trying to do. That could be also something that is also very particular maybe to Assam, certain tribes practices. How do you think they're being looked at? I think that these are the three broad questions that I might have. If it would be great if you could put some light on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanjukta. So there's a lot of food for thought here, and it seems Sanjukta has opened up 3 different dimensions for you to think about. One would be gender, and then come to caste and tribe and Assam. So what we do here, Daisy, is we give you another, say, 5 to 6 minutes, and then we open up the floor. But on to you first. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sanjukta.
Thank you.
I think there is a question in the message box, in the chat box.
Yes, there is a question in the chat box. Maybe we can take up the questions together. Or do you want to, take all the questions together and add them to Sanjukta's comments?
I would first like to answer
also.
Sanjukta, I think. Then
okay.
Okay, then I mean, let's begin with Sanjukta's questions, and which are very important questions and also requires a lot of time to answer it. But briefly, the first questions when Sanjukta, if I have understood you correctly, you asked about the different suborders within Vaishnavism and how they perform Vaishnavism differently, how Vaishnavism is embodied differently. You know, why I chose this topic was also not the reason why I chose initially in my MPhil was nothing profound. I mean, my supervisor kept on asking me, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? And I didn't have any profound answer. But now when I look back, why I wanted to research on this particular topic was because I got so confused about who is a Vaishnava in Assam. Because there are so many ways of being a Vaishnava. And sadly and unfortunately, we were not taught the historicities. Most of us are CBSE pass out students, so we don't know what led to this different manifestation of Vaishnavism in Assam. So luckily my sister was at that point of time was working on Vaishnava architectural history and I began questioning her, and then she said, no, the Hotras are not same. The Hotras look different. The Hotra architectures are different based on their the subfold or the suborder that they belong to. And that led me to read about it and to know more about it. And what I found in the field, and cutting it short, that I chose because I wanted to look at the caste dimension, because what was reflecting from all these differences was this element of caste, something that we don't speak out loud when it comes to Assam in particular and Northeast in general, because caste uh, mm, does not operate the way it operates. Caste in Assam does not operate the way it on vernacular way of hierarchizing and excluding and including, creating the other. So what Vaishnavism in Assam had experienced over the last 500 years was that, and in fact, right after the demise of the founder, Honkar Dev, that it fragmented into, it got divided into four subsets or four folds, four suborders, where two of the suborders were, consolidated purely based on caste. So one is the Brahminical subsects, which are dominantly found in Majuli Island, which is also known as the Vaishnava hub. And this is how you can see how it's not only a religious discourse, it's also a very political discourse, like which fold or which suborder of Vaishnavism became the hegemonic representation of Vaishnavism. And if you ask what Vaishnavism is, if you ask a picture of Assam's Vaishnavism to someone outside of Assam, or in fact someone who is an insider, the picture of a Majuli Hotra would come out, right? A Hotra from the Brahminical subsect. But there is also a subsect which is not documented, or which is not documented well, or documented scholarly documentation has not happened as much as the hegemonic Vaishnava order or suborder has been in Assam. So that's a subsect called Kala Honghoti, or Kala Honghoti, or the specific fold is called Maya Morias, if you know. So, and I'm sure you're aware of it. So the Maya Morias are radically, and I am warned to not use the word radical by a fellow sociologist of religion, but radical in here we mean that historically they have been very politically active, right? They have revolted against the atrocities done on them for practicing Vaishnavism. The Shudra gurus were assassinated, their families were killed, the Shudra disciples were being killed. So that we have a 40 years long Moamoria revolt against the Brahminical the Brahminical domination and its alliance with the Ahom kingdom, right? So how this historicities, your historical position also shapes how you view religion, how you practice religion. That is what I found in my field, that the embodiment of a Shuddha Vaishnava is so different from an embodiment of a Brahmin or an upper caste Vaishnava, especially from the Vaishnavas from the dominant suborder of Vaishnavism. And those are different in ways which are not only in terms of devotion or in terms of their attitude towards caste, or their attitude towards equality, or some kind of religious democracy within the subfold or suborder, but also how they represent themselves, visually. What are their prayers, their scriptures, their texts, their rituals, which the embodiment is not how Vaishnavism is embodied in Assam is so shaped by it's so deeply shaped by their caste position and their historical relationship with the power bloc, with the hegemony, with the political power as well as the religious power. What kind of relationship that they have brewed over this 500 years. And the Shudra Vaishnavas, I would like to argue that they perform their religiosity in a very resistant way. And resistant does not always means conflict. Resistant also means indifference. So in many ways, resistance is articulated, and that is visible in how they practice their religiosity. So if I have answered your question, or have I answered your question, or have I diverted
No,
too much?
no. You answered my question. I
Okay.
also know once you research it, it's a huge topic to just
Yeah.
reply in few lines. It would
Okay,
be
so
unfair to
your
you.
question, thank you, Sanjukta. And for your
No,
second question, my position as a woman, yeah, and I think I won't have much. My experience would not be much different from other female researchers, but there would be obviously specificities. How I have viewed it as that you have you have to crack two kinds of access when it comes to the field. One is access to the physical space, and secondly, access to responses. So access to the physical field depends on the kind of society that you are going to go and we're going to study. And for me, it was very difficult. If I've understood your question right, you asked about the difficulties of being a female researcher. It was very difficult for me to find a rented place because I didn't have any legit uh, in the sense that for that society that I was studying, a single, unmarried woman coming from nowhere, uh, educated outside of the state, who does not speak the dialect, who is not from the religious, the fold that I'm going to study. So I was alien in many ways, right? I was alien as a person in the field. So it was very difficult for me to even find a space to live. And it required a lot of negotiation and a lot of winning the trust of, because I didn't even, so a question that I used to get asked, that where do you work? And I was a PhD research scholar, and research was not a legit, occupation, especially in a field where they don't care about research. What research, right? So that is one, and that is the accessibility of the field and the physical space. And another is my accessibility to responses, which required a lot of effort in certain sites, not in all sites. And I cannot have a I cannot say that it was similar in all sites. In certain sites, I was welcomed. I think it also depends on the power relation, and that's a different topic. But I'm sure you understand when I say that it's a power relation, that how I how I was given the responses also dependent on how my respondents the viewed the power relation between me and them. Right. So that is another hurdle that I faced as a female researcher, because I don't know. I don't know if I have understood it right, and I have no. This is a good. Actually, this question is making me think again. But at times, I felt like I was treated, or I was conceived of as, or perceived as a fool, because I was also told that religion is not something that women can understand. It's beyond you, right? And why do you want to know this? You will not be able to understand this. So there were times when I was getting a response, and in between the respondents would like, you won't understand, and they would just refuse to tell me things, right? So there were many challenges. Yeah, there were many challenges, just practical challenges to, ethical challenges of being a researcher. And of course you have to be, because you have to the building the rapport also requires you to merge within the field so that you don't look significantly different, or you can blend in. So you have to there is pressure of looking alike, which of course is not possible, but we as female researcher, we try our best in terms of attire, in terms of gestures, in terms of whom to bow down to and whom not to bow down to, how to bow down to. For example, I put the dupatta on my head once, not even once. It's in the beginning, the first 1 or 2 days, when I saw women putting the dupatta on the head when they bow down to the guru, I also did the same, and the guru started laughing at me. He said, "Why have you put dupatta?" Because I saw other people. It's not dupatta actually; it's the anchal of the chadar on my head. So I saw other women hiding their hair, so I did the same. And he started laughing at me. He said, "No, you are not supposed to do that. This is only for married women. You can just hide your back." So these are like, it's a very how we understand is sometimes we start imitating, and the imitation is not always fruitful in the field. And women, especially a female researcher, I think, in terms of attire, in terms of how they present themselves, as physical bodies, becomes very challenging at times when we are researching, especially when we are researching in a religious space, a space which is loaded with morals and morals and values, and certain kind of an idea of a sacred. And coming to your third question, which would require again deeper intervention. But when you said the caste and tribe, and of course, these are different categories, and sociologists have long conceptualized these categories. But if you see the experiences and why am I bringing them together in my narrative, is that they were all considered, the lower caste and the tribes were all put inside the category of untouchables in the Vaishnava narrative. But how their untouchability is articulated, it is interesting. So lower caste, especially the scheduled castes like Koibotos, they were considered, they are obviously considered untouchables based on the Varna logic, right? That is that's very easy to understand. But why were the tribes untouchable? The tribes' untouchability was not articulated through this Varna ideology. It was articulated through their bodily, through their physicality, in the sense that what they eat, how they live, uh, what kind of houses do they have, what kind of animals do they keep in their houses. So very corporeal. So the articulation of untouchability was very physical and corporeal. Although the practices that emerge out of that idea of untouchability towards both scheduled caste or the low caste and the tribes was similar, but how the dominant caste, the dominant Vaishnava monks or the Vaishnava disciples articulated untouchability was very different, and it was very interesting. So a tribe would be considered polluted and untouchable because of the kind of food that they eat, especially pork and chicken. So chicken is a very curious case, by the way, in among the Vaishnavas. Sanjukta, you might be aware of that you are allowed to eat mutton, but you cannot eat chicken, and you are allowed to eat duck but not chicken. So there are very interesting logics and stories behind why chicken is an untouchable food. Pork, of course, pork is very self-evident. So the way they eat, and also the way their death rituals, the death rituals of the tribal communities were considered not purifying because they concluded in 3 days. And therefore, they were called untouchables. So the logic of untouchability of the scheduled castes or lower caste and the tribal communities have been very different. But the consequences of that were similar. The exclusion was similar. So I think I have answered your question, Sanjukta. Okay,
Thank
so
you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Very detailed answers. Now, there are a number of, evidently so. The talk was so interesting and that has elicited so many questions. So we'll have to go back to the chat box now, and then I'll ask people to raise their hands and speak their questions if they have any. But can you access the chat box at your end?
I can, but can you read it out if you don't mind?
Yes. I'll read the questions out. So the first question is from Mr. Vijaypal, if not Dr. Vijaypal, I'm not sure. They say, Madam, how to balance between existing empirical messiness that you referred to and theoretical frames in research? Many times the messiness and contradictions don't settle within the sociological theories and frames. What is to be the dharma, quote unquote, of a researcher in such situations? That is one question. Do you want me to read all the questions together?
No. I let me try answer this because I really don't, and it will be very quick because as I said at the beginning of my talk that these are not the questions that I have answered already. I am thinking aloud, and I am here. I don't know what is to be the dharma of a researcher in such a situation, but I think to take accountability and understand the power relations between us and the field that we study and the people we study, not look at our respondents as categories and look at them as people where sacred life, whose sacred and the social lives are constantly perpetually entangled, and the contradiction and the messiness, I think the models that I mentioned in my talk somewhat, I think, would be able to help us uh, address this messiness and the contradictions that are not that are not usually found in the classical sociological theories. And I think to address the messiness is the first step, right? Even to understand it, that it's not a clear cut. Our field is not composed of clear cut, watertight compartments of things, of data, of information, but it's a messy world. It's a sorry, someone's mic was on. So even to address that messiness exists and to go beyond the classical categorization, or to go beyond the structural understanding of religion, would be the first step. But I really don't have an answer to how to balance this existing messiness or the theoretical between the theoretical framework within sociological theories. Can we move to the next one?
Yeah. So Harsh Vardhan asks, can we apply the concept of collective effervescence and related Geets notes that religious practice has a pervasive, long-lasting impact on moods and motivations in people while studying the embodied aspect of religious practices?
Can we apply to collective effervescence? Yeah, actually, the sociologists of affect, especially in the sociology of religion, who are studying affects, have certain similarities or convergences in how Durkheim looked at collective effervescence. But I think Durkheim, my reading of Durkheim is that how he viewed collective effervescence was not comprehensive in nature, or he maybe perhaps did not give much attention to, which can be actually extended beyond and be studied within sociology of affect or affectual realm of religion. And related Geertz's note on religious practice as a pervasive. Yes, yes, Geertz's understanding of religious practices but how that is my understanding of Geertz. I might be wrong, that Geertz looked at as the symbolic religion as a symbol, right? Religion is a cultural practice, something out there. He's of course talked about how it has a pervasive, long-lasting impact on the moods and motivations in people. But even when he talks about moods and motivations of people, is talking about it from a very relational point of view and not from an embodied point of view. Uh, we will obviously have to think about it more. I mean, particularly me, I'll have to. This is a very important. It is a very important question because how I understood Geertz, maybe I have to go back to Geertz again to think about this, how to answer this question, is that uh, it's not really what is religious is out there, of course, but it's not always out there. And the embodied uh, perspective of religion, an embodied approach to study embodiment in religion is to debunk that, to see that what is there is also within. And it is, again, going back to the first question, it's messy, but it's entangled, but it's there. And we, as a sociologist of religion, perhaps should at least begin acknowledging this entanglement. I'm sorry, Harsh. And by the way, Harsh, I know of Harsh and he does really good work. I mean, we can have him as a speaker in one of those days if Jigyasa can make him agree
His
to it.
work is also, I think, is on sociology of religion. He's
Yes,
also
it's
working on
amazing.
some in, yeah.
He is
So the current speaker and the current discussant are unapologetically making a case for a future speaker. So I will take the opportunity to invite him to come and share his work.
I mean, I think Harsh should actually. I mean, I'm amazed by how Harsh's conceptual clarity. How he is clear about the concepts when he studies religion. I think we should, of course, have him as one of our speakers, one of the speakers in DAK.
Yes, Daisy, your endorsement is well taken. And moving on to the next
Thank you.
question, what advice would you give to young researchers planning field in sacred or religious communities?
Oh, this is my student asking me question.
Okay, this is your student, yeah.
Yes.
And then you have another one which says, how do religious communities navigate conflicting values and moral dilemmas?
You give young researchers planning fieldwork in I, I think my entire talk was low-key advising advising how to plan your fieldwork in studying the sacred and religious communities. Adarsh, I can send you the script of my talk. And but thank you for the question, Adarsh, and thank you for attending the talk. And the next question is how do religious communities navigate conflicting values and moral dilemmas? How do religious communities navigate? I am not clear about this question. I mean, whoever has asked the question, can you clarify what do you mean by conflicting values and moral dilemmas?
Hi Daisy.
Hi, Jana. Tell me.
So, by this question, I meant that how, if we are truly believer in religious practices, and if we are facing some dilemmas or some turmoil in our lives, how it is interconnected to each other, and how religious practices can make us feel better.
Oh, that's a heavily loaded question. I have to begin first. I have to begin understanding what do you mean by true believer? I don't know because what I understood from your question is if you're a believer of a particular religious tradition or if you believe a particular theological doctrine and if you face a certain kind of contradictions in your life, moral contradiction, that your actions are contradicting your belief system, and how do you navigate? That's what you asked, Jenna?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this is an answer that should be answered by some godman or someone, at least who is well aware of the doctrinal aspect of religion. I really don't have an answer to this. I mean, I think sociologists of religion don't attempt to answer these questions. Uh, I mean, of course, there is a religion is normative. Religion has a normative framework of how you should behave, how you should act in a society, in your society, what is acceptable, what is an acceptable behavior, and what is a non-acceptable behavior. Uh, but how to navigate when there is a contradiction, I think, is the domain of the theologist and not a sociologist.
Or prescriptive psychologist.
Thank you, Daisy.
Even that.
Thank you, Jaina. But thank you for the question.
Are there any other questions that people would like to ask or would like to raise? Now is the time.
Jigyasa,
Ram,
can you hear me?
yes, Ram, please.
Okay. So, thank
Ram, I have to stop
Daisy,
you.
I think so. The range of methodology kind of issues which you face. Hello, can you hear me?
There's a slight disturbance, so we are not able to hear you properly. If you could move.
Maybe because of network. So I'm moving around. I'm around coffee house. So okay. So am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Yes.
So okay. So thank you, Daisy. I think so. The presentation was wonderful, and the kind of method we are trained into as political scientists, and the kind of method which as sociologist you employ, we have kind of such a difference. And I was thinking about the ways in which you framed the ideas of, for example, epistemological reflexivity, which we can employ or as a kind of any kind of scholar, as a critical sociologist or whatsoever. So I was wondering that on many occasions, the plurality of the ways in which discourses or experiences, the way in which it plays out, sometimes we tend to come up with an explanation in which we tend to say that things are quite complex and things are power ridden, and let's kind of understand it in the ways in which things are. So it's like almost reiteration of the empirical fact. I was wondering about the idea of objectivity, or I was wondering about something called a structural explanation. So can we really arrive at objectivity, or can we really arrive at a structural explanation if we go with too much reflexivity, or we simply look at simply the restatement of empirical facts? So this is my question.
I think this is a question of what framework do you adopt to study a particular social reality. I mean, do you want to want to have a structural explanation? If you want to have a structural explanation, that of course, the way that sociologists have been studying religion since the inception of the discipline would help, especially structural functionalist theories or structural functionalist theories, the frameworks offered by Emile to Max Weber to Lévi-Strauss to other classical sociological theories. But the whole point of my talk, Ram, was to critically look at those frameworks, structural frameworks, and then go beyond that. What is there? Is there something more about religion? Is there something more about the society than its structures, than its institutions? And objectivity, as you asked, is objectivity, I think, I mean, how do you define objectivity? Objectivity is not, are you talking about scientific objectivity? Are you, in the sense, all of us, are we talking about scientific objectivity, cause and effect kind of an objectivity, or objectivity as not being to explain things as they are and not how they ought to be? uh, I mean, unfortunately, social realities are too complex to uh, to arrive at a clear-cut understanding of how things are. I mean, it takes time. That's why we take so much time in our field to write a thesis. All of us spend so much time in researching a particular topic because it takes a lot of it takes an effort and constant negotiation with the field. And objectivity in that case is, I mean, I would, I would prefer to move beyond scientific objectivity and would like to be objective, objective in a sense that I speak the stories, I tell the stories from the point of view of the people who who are the keepers of the stories. So treating myself as a researcher as the medium of narrating the stories which already exist in the field, and not to have, I mean, trying not to make meanings out of thin air just because of my institutional training. I mean, it's a very difficult task to do because our institutional training tells us to see things the way they are, just, how Jigyasa and Sanjukta have also agreed with me in the sense that we are trained to see certain things in a certain way. We are trying to understand or explain certain things in a certain way. I think reflexivity as this whole development in sociology, in the later part of development of sociology as a discipline, is here to remind us that we don't really have to go through the categories that we study in our institutional training or will learn in our institutional training. So first, yes, how we define objectivity, and this is an ongoing debate. But one thing I think all of us have agreed to is objectivity means that stating things as they are and not stating things how they ought to be, or how I think or I see things as the way, that again, that power relation comes, that I think I can better explain my field. And it has happened in ethnography, many ethnographic works in the past. So that, and objectivity. And the other question was on, sorry, Ram, I get lost at times. So
It's fine.
structural understanding. I think you asked for structural understanding. Like, do you want to arrive at a structural understanding?
I think you have answered. Yes, structural.
Oh, yes. Do you want to arrive at a
See,
structural understanding?
I was thinking about, I was wondering about, because as a researcher, we are all into our own field, into our own researches, and we all are not, we might be very much embedded in the field, we might find some nuances in the field, and yet as a claim emerging out of our data through our experience, and we tend to say something more beyond the simply stated field, beyond the simply plural discourse. And there I was not wondering about objectivity, the way in which we understand it in a very scientific manner, or the way in which uh, people, especially the scientific claim, the way in which it emerges. But even as researcher, we all of us, be it sociology or political science or whatsoever, or a historian, all of them, they tend to make a point after in a thesis or whatsoever. I was wondering because you are very reflexive in the sense, but sometimes that reflexivity also leads us in a very kind of a messy state, whereby we are not able to kind of make sense of the complexity uh, through a not just through a framework, but through our own kind of understanding. So it kind of ties us down. So I was wondering in that sense that if there is a structural explanation emerging, if there is a kind of a objective explanation which could emerge, so what would it look like? Because uh, your reflexivity, the way in which you are framing reflexivity, sometimes it might tie us down. So that is what I was wondering. It's just a kind of query kind of thing, but I understand what you're saying.
No, I think I'll quickly answer this. I'm not seeing reflexivity as something tying us down, and I'm looking at reflexivity as as part of our method. Like, how reflexivity is not about philosophical reflexivity. I'm talking about reflexivity, being reflexive about our own positions, they're being reflexive about the dispositions that we carry as researchers into the field, into a field which we claim to study. First of all, why should we study the field? I mean, for the respondents, it may I mean, the questions that I get in the field by my respondents, that why do you want to study us, why is it necessary? These are very important questions. That is a reflexive questions, right? I mean, that can make you reflexive about, or make you think about your own intentions, or the intentions shouldn't only be to gain a PhD degree, right? The intentions and your approach, your intention, your approach, your method, the deeply dyed relations of power in the field. I think the way I was talking about reflexivity is to reflect on the method and our approaches, and not on the philosophical reflection. I mean, I would love to engage with the philosophical reflection, but I think that would not help me arrive at a sociological study of a particular religious community. But thank you so much, Ram, for the question. It's a very interesting question.
So Sushant has a question. And then I think I also saw somebody raising their hand. Based on your fieldwork amongst the Vaishnavas of Assam, could you reflect on the ways in which the religious practices and ontologies within Vaishnava traditions may resist, rework, or reconfigure the cross-cultural applicability of conventional categories of quote-unquote religion? And then we have Visak and Aisha's hands raised for questions as well. So let us take both these questions together, and then Daisy could probably respond. Am I Vishak? Am I pronouncing?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So Daisy, because we were on the discussion on the structuralist explanation and reflexivity. So I mean, I don't think these are, I mean, just also partially taking from what Ram was asking. I don't think these are contradictory in any way, because of course it becomes more difficult, and it's bound to get difficult. It is supposed to get difficult. They attempt to provide structuralist sort of explanation. I mean, if it has to get difficult, it needs to get difficult. So my question is, like in your experience, like as a social scientist, how has what is broadly categorized as humanities helped you in framing your question to approaching your field to whatnot? Because we have this distinction, humanities and social sciences, which are often clubbed together in many places, right? So how can, like one of my professors used to say, how can a humanities-inspired social sciences can help us in thinking this question out? It's also because I'm also reminded of this book where and how to become a sociologist without becoming a bore, right? I think even to not become a bore in our sociological journey, or not to become sociological terrorist of some kind, I think this is an important question. So what has been your experience like? Because I mean, I know that you are also interested in poetry, literature, and other stuff. So how has it helped you frame your question and approaches? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We'll also let Aisha, pose her question before we come to you, Daisy. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have a very small question.
Hi, Aisha.
So Vaishnavism is seen as this one umbrella religion, if you are calling it so, under which, entire Assam is sort of thought to be. But there also exist pockets of people who have escaped it and are followers of, the Shakta Dharma or Shaivism. So in your field, have you come across any such instances? If yes, then what kind of reorientation is required from existing sociological literature to sort of
Aisha,
understand?
I lost your voice. I think
Hello?
there's some problem with my network.
Hello.
Isha, why don't you type it out? Because that then helps. Yeah, I'm so sorry, because it seems there seems to be an issue. Hanji.
Okay, I'll type it out.
Daisy, can you hear me? Dr. Barman. All right. So I think Daisy, Dr. Barman has probably stepped out of the meeting owing to the internet issue. So we'll just linger around for a couple of seconds before she joins and starts answering these questions. Meanwhile, if we have any more questions, we'll probably take them now. Or maybe we could type them out in the chat box.
I'm so sorry. There was again some network issues here.
That's all right.
I was listening to Isha and then I lost her in between.
Yes, so she's typing a message out for you. Meanwhile, probably what we do is we could take up the other two questions that were asked from Sushant and Visal. And then
Okay, I'm still trying to understand the question that Shishana has written down based on your fieldwork among the Vaishnava. Could you reflect on the ways in which religious practices may resist or pick up conventional categories of religion? So, Sushant, I'm trying to understand your question, but conventional categories of religion, what are the conventional categories that you are referring to? If you can make it clear, then I perhaps would be able to answer your question. Or maybe I might just not have the answer to your question, but cross-cultural applicability or conventional categories of religion.
I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that there's something that Ram and Sushant and probably Visakha are trying to kind of, maybe they want us to turn our attention towards a certain way in which, is there a certain, for the lack of better word, a way to universalize, specific localized research in the sense that when objectivity and structure and can I say something more than about this outside of my immediate local field? So are there questions of conventional religion? Perhaps what I could be wrong. I'm total guesswork here, but maybe Sushant is trying to say something to that effect, which says, well, this is how my research speaks of and about religion in this location. Can I make a larger point vis-a-vis how religion is practiced, felt, experienced, imitated elsewhere? And if that is a possibility, then perhaps we're aiming at, or we can think in terms of some objectivity, not in the objective factual sense of the term, but in the sense of the term wherein we say, well, there's replicability, there's universality. If you very positivist, but can we take both positivist? Because given the post-truth, because as political scientists we have that problem, which is that the post-truth, the post-structural, the post-modernist is now pushing us in a direction where do you draw the line between fact and fiction? Where do you draw the line between real and unreal? And given religion is so emotively, effectually charged with all of it, perhaps with sociology as a discipline, that immediate concern may not arise, but definitely with disciplines like history and politics, where you have to perhaps establish certain objective criteria before you start explaining your field. I mean, I've overdone my question / speaking for others here, but perhaps
I'm enjoying listening to you, so you can carry on.
No, but my sense is that perhaps this cross-cultural, can I take my field and can I take my observation from here elsewhere and say, what, we can draw an objective. There's a story here which may be applicable or may not be applicable elsewhere. Can that be done in terms of then, hopefully dragging the positivist, ghost out of that sociological moment of that kind in others and bring it to this reflexive, humane, I'm speaking back to my field, but my field is also speaking back to me. Can these two come together in a certain way? I think if I've understood and if I've added my question as well to that. And Aisha has also written her question, which I'm going to now read. Vaishnavism is seen as this umbrella religion under which entire Assam is thought to be, but there are pockets of people who have escaped it and are followers of Sakta Jainism. And she has her
Hello.
hand raised. Yes, yes.
Sorry, I could not type my entire question. So it's not Jainism, it's Shaivism. And my question was like, if you have come across any such thing in your field, then what would be your suggestion on the kind of reorientation that is required from existing sociological literatures to sort of understand their life worlds? Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you, Isha, for this question. I'll come back to Sushant's question after I address Isha's question, because Isha, Vaishnavism is seen as the umbrella religion, and there is a politics behind it. And it's not an umbrella. In fact, we don't even have a census on or a number on how many Vaishnavas are there, the number of the population of Vaishnavas in Assam, although it's considered that the majority of the Hindus in Assam are Vaishnavas. It's not an umbrella religion. I mean, Vaishnavism has been adopted as the marker of Assamese religiosity, and it has a history behind it, and how Vaishnavism, as part of the Bhakti movement when it emerged in the 15th century, has always have in some form or the other a cordial relationship with the power blocks, right? Whoever the sovereign, or and then of course the British, no, the Ahoms and the Coach Kings, and then followed by the British government and colonial government, and then obviously modern nation state for post independence. So Vaishnavism has had very fruitful alliance with the power blocks, and that is why I believe that Vaishnavism appears as the umbrella religion of Assam, or as a marker of Assamese religiosity. But if you see in the ground, empirically speaking, there are multiple religious formations that coexist, which you have rightfully, very rightly, sorry, very rightly pointed out about, the Shaivism or Shaktism, which is equally dominant equally dominant religious orders, or religious formations within the Assamese population. But yes, there is, because Vaishnavism has succeeded through its hot draw institution to proselytize as much as possible. And it also depends on the political economy of the hot draws, because the hot draws sustain through the guru call, or the taxes that you pay regularly, sometimes periodically, sometimes monthly, somewhere it's annually, to the hot draw. So it becomes very important for them to have legitimate members. So proselytization is, which I argue, and I might be, I might be criticized for this, but proselytization within Vaishnava fold has been very successful, and the intention, which this is my observation in the field based on the responses that I get from my participants, is not only about spreading the religiosity, but also bringing in more people who would pay the tax, so that the hot draws as an institution can continue to function. So the whole idea of Vaishnavism as the religion of Assam is also very deceiving, as a very politically charged project. I mean, I'm sure Sanjukta will also agree with me. When you go into the ground, you would know that there's a political discourse that endorses a certain kind of religion as the dominant hegemonic religion, and both contribute in each other's perpetuation and power. And coming to the question that Shashank asked, if I have understood how Jigyasa had explained, how conventional categories of how, okay, this regional specificities was my starting point, of course, of how how Vaishnavism is embodied in a very regionally specific way. But it's as a sociologist, I would also not shy away from looking at the general in the particular. I mean, this might be an approach that has been abandoned by many, but along with looking at the uh, localized specificities, I'm also looking at the general pattern. So when I'm talking about you know talking about a particular caste confrontation or a conflict between two suborders, I'm not only talking about the empirical details of that conflict or that negotiation. I'm also talking about the greater questions of social identity, the greater questions of how hierarchies are placed, how hierarchy is a universal phenomena. Hierarchies, how they are shaped, how they are placed in particular societies, of course, are different, of course are diversely manifested, but hierarchy is a universal phenomenon. There is no egalitarian society per se. So when I'm talking about these historical specificities, local specificities of Vaishnavism, I'm also looking at how the egalitarian principles of bhakti has interacted with the understanding of hierarchies, with the understanding of power, the understanding of the other in this region, in these spaces, in these localized spaces. So how these ontologies within Vaishnava tradition may resist or reconfigure, I'm not sure. I mean, it's a good question. I perhaps have to think about it a little more before answering this question. But how I connect regional specificities with the universal, I'm not saying that there has to be a universal theory of religion, but I'm saying that there are universal questions that we ask, like how it is this deeply hierarchical exclusionary practices, how they interact, how they exist in this contemporary world where we talk about democracy, where we talk about equality from a constitutional point of view, right? I mean, in the modern nation state, for example, how we conceptualize modernity and what are the principles that we, how does this hierarchical structures in the Vaishnavas religious order interact with or answer the questions of democracy or equality. So yes. And coming to Vishak's question, I don't know, this is a question that I don't know if I can answer this. Yes, I don't know if my inclination to humanities has contributed to how I conceptualize or how I made sense of my field or how I wrote about my field, but it has, of course, for sure, brought in hurdles in my sociological inquiry of religion. So this is, I don't know, it hasn't helped. It has actually put me into more contradictions, pushed me into more questions, and perhaps because my inclination to poetry and other and humanities in general has, perhaps because I have an inclination, and that's why I'm now thinking about the affect aspect of religion, which I did not even think of when I was writing about embodiment, writing about how Vaishnavism is, performed, or how Vaishnavism is experienced in my thesis. So yeah, this is. I think I've answered all the questions, no, Jigyasa?
Yes, you have. Very succinctly and very
Or I
successfully.
have failed to answer, but have addressed.
Addressed all of them, and successfully so. I don't think we'd use the word failure and you in the same sentence. It was a pretty successful session. I think
Thank you so much.
everybody stuck to the end, and so many questions came up. And thank you so much, Daisy. It was wonderful listening to you. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest at for the TheDaak Better, and for your very informative, very engaging session, and for all the questions. I also thank the participants who came in, who put their thoughts together, who kind of tried and pulled some of Daisy's established or at least some of the things that she was thinking out loud were kind of pulled a little apart here. And I liked how Daisy have come back with very good answers, and in some places as she mentioned earlier, that these are also questions that she's raising, not necessarily the answers that she's providing. And I think in that spirit, this is an ongoing, quest for finding answers. In the next Saturday, TheDaak, we have something called the social sciences and the quantum mind. And perhaps Dr. Varun Vigamal, who's going to be speaking on Saturday, would try to disentangle the question of consciousness, and perhaps some of the affect conversation would come up there as well. So at TheDaak, we're also trying to answer, if not answer, at least raise those questions. Thank you so much. It's already 6, and this has been the most engaging session, which will now end. Thank you, everyone. I wish you all a very good night, and we'll come back again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jigyasa and Sanjukta, for giving me this space to share my questions with your audience. And thank you so much for the brilliant questions that were raised in this talk. And that would all the questions, I believe, would help me formulate or help me make sense of the questions that I began this talk with. Thank you so much, Jigyasa, again for the platform. And thank you, TheDaak. Thank you, TheDaak. TheDaak it's a part of the TheDaak, right? TheDaak Collective. Yes, yes. Yes. So thank you so much to the entire group. Thank you so much to the audience, and thank you so much to the participants who asked me real tough questions.
Okay. On that note, on that gratitude-filled note, we'll see everybody again coming Saturday.